All right, everyone, in this section, we're going to look at some of the basic functions and identify different parts of them. Okay, so first function we're going to look at is what's called the identity function. The identity function is the function f of x equals x. Now, just one reminder, f of x is the same thing as y. So if you see y equals x, it's the same thing. And basically, this is every point where your x and your y are the same. So notice it has the point 0, 0, has the point 1, 1, has the point 2, 2, and so on. And this is just a line. Okay. Now, this can be modified by moving the graph up, down, left, right. Those are all transformations. They come up in a different section. But this is known as the linear or identity function. Okay. The second one is what's called the squaring function. This is just when something is squared. So notice I have f of x equals x squared. And again, this can be moved around, but this is 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4. And that's where that point 2, 4 comes from. Okay? And this is just what it looks like anytime something gets squared. It looks like a parabola. And this one opens up. You can have them where they open on their side. They can open upside down. There's all sorts of different things that can happen with transformations. But again, those come later. Okay, the third one is what's called the cubing function. Notice I just have some dots here. But what happens is if you connect these points, you end up with a graph that looks something like that. And this is what happens when things are cubed. So, again, going point by point, 0 cubed is 0. That's why the point 0, 0 is there. 1 cubed is 1. That's why the point 1, 1 is there. 2 cubed is 8. And that's why the point 2, 8 is on my graph. Okay, so that's the cubing function. All right, the fourth one is the cube root. And cube root is the inverse of cubing. So notice that this one is essentially just the exact same thing, but it's laying on its side. And again, if you think of this, this is the point 8, 2. What's the cube root of 8? It's 2. Okay, so you can go through it just like that and end up kind of in the same spot. All right, our next one is the square root function. And the square root function is essentially your parabola laying on its side, but it's only half of that because you cannot have negatives underneath the square root. Okay, so it stops right here at 0. The square root of 0 is 0, the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 4 is 2, and that's why the point 4, 2 is on here. The square root of 9 is 3, and again, that's why that point's on there. So that's the square root function. Okay, the fourth one is the exponential function. The exponential function, if you were to insert and put in a bunch of points, you would get a graph that looks something like this. But it depends on what that b value is. So one of the points that's always on there is the point 0, 1. Because anything to the 0 power, remember, we talked about this last time, but anything to the 0 power, so b to the 0, would be 1, and that's where that 0, 1 comes from. If my b were 2, I would have 2 to the 0, which is still just 1, and that's why that point's on there. Okay? Now, the rest of the graph is based on that b. So if I have 2 to the x power, if I were to put 1 in for x, my y value would be 2. So the point 1, 2 would be on that graph. If my b value were 3, and I put 1 in, my point would be 1, 3. And all I'm doing is taking and substituting points in. You've done that in different graphing lessons already, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm just substituting different values in for my x. But all exponential functions have a graph that looks similar to this. The only difference would be maybe sometimes it's steeper, or maybe sometimes it's flatter, kind of like that one. So those are kind of some of the things that happen. All right, the final two are what's called the greatest integer function and absolute value. Now, the greatest integer function, notice, is what's called a step function. It jumps up from one to the next to the next. Okay, and what ends up happening is you see these open circles. It's not included there, but directly above it I have a closed circle, and it is included there. So it's moving along this line here, but then it jumps up to this line, and then it jumps up to this line. So that's why it's called sometimes a stair-step function, and that's the greatest integer function. And then finally you have the absolute value. The absolute value is always a v. Okay, so it's v-shaped. It's got two parts, the part that's going down and the part that's going up. Okay, so that's the v of the of the absolute value function. Now the rules of absolute value are those things are positive, and that's why you'll notice it is in the upper half of the graph, because that's when my y is positive. Alright, so those are some of your basic functions. In one of the very soon future videos, we're going to talk about different parts of these, but that's what we've got for now.